Well, good evening and welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this public informational session this evening. My name is Ryan Blazik. I'm with EGLE's Environmental Support Division. I'll be helping to facilitate this informational session tonight, which is on the Mid-Michigan Dam restoration projects and EGLE permitting. Before we get started, though, I just have a couple logistical things to go through with you. All lines are muted during this session, so you'll be able to hear us, but we're not going to be able to hear you on your end. We're going to be using the questions box or the Q&A box on your Zoom toolbar, which you see at the bottom of the screen for any questions that you have. You can feel free to type those in at any time. We're going to have several presentations, and we're going to have some question and answer with any time that we have left. And also, we're recording this session, so we're recording it, and it'll be on our YouTube channel here in a couple days. So to get things started, I'd just like to introduce Jared Sanders. Jared is the Assistant Division Director for Water Resources Division for EGLE. So welcome, Jared.
Hey, Ryan. I'm going to try and share my screen here. There we go. Hopefully you can see that. So anyone who logged on right on time before that, we spent 15 minutes trying to teach me how to use the screen.
I'm afraid we're still not seeing it, Jared.
Oh, no.
One more shot.
All right. How about now?
Got it.
All right, great. Okay. Well, thanks for joining us. I know for the last 2 years, and I guess starting a couple of years ago, many of the folks that are on here, probably all the folks that are on here, have been hugely impacted by the 2020 dam failures, and you know, since that time, there's been a ton of work going on, and there's a ton more to go. So again, I'm Jared Sanders. I'm Assistant Division Director for Water Resources Division. That's the division that does the several of the programs, or the main programs that will require permitting for some of the sort of ongoing projects that are happening right now, the interim projects, and then sort of the, you know, the final projects that Four Lakes Task Force is working toward within the system there. So jump slides here. So, you know, our goals for this evening, we're going to go through things pretty quickly, and not to try to make anyone an expert in this type of permitting, but really the goal is to help sort of try to promote some understanding of what's been going on and what's going to happen as we move towards applications and permit decisions for the final projects. You know, basically, I guess, to try to get an understanding of you know, how we work through our permitting process, and then how we're going to make decisions on the final projects themselves. You know, sort of a secondary goal is with all of these permitting processes, there's an opportunity for the public engagement, public input in those processes. And so hope to enhance that public input, not just in terms of, you know, sort of the amount of comments that we get, but the, you know, sort of applicability to, you know, that decision-making process. And then really, you know, finally, you know, we certainly are a state agency, and, you know, local communities are the ones that have been impacted the most. So try to, you know, build in some transparency into those processes, and to try to, you know, build some trust and get some engagement. I mean, at the end of the day, these are huge projects. There was a huge impact when the failures happen, and there are huge projects going forward. And you know, the more that we can sort of get it out there, how we're going to make decisions and why, and also, you know, make sure that the folks that are concerned about, you know, what those final projects are going to look like, that we're going to do our jobs. We're going to make sure that the final project is something that's safe, that's protective and enhancing of the environment, and protective of people's properties. So So the things that we're going to cover tonight, I'm going to spend a little bit of time just talking about the permitting process, sort of the basics of it, sort of the bones around how that process is going to work. I'll hand it off to Mike Size, one of our dam safety engineers. He'll kind of go through the plan, the timeline of how we expect things to go over the next several years. I mean, we're largely responsive. I mean, we respond to applications and respond to those things. And so a lot of that came from, Four Lakes Task Force and how they plan to move forward. But we have our part in those timelines too. And then get into sort of the three main sort of statutes that these projects need permits for, the dam safety statute, and then the water resources statute, so wetlands and the lakes and streams, sort of the environmental and natural resources laws and permit decisions, and then the standards with which we make decisions under the floodplain. So it's actually really 4 statutes mixed in there. I didn't get real heavy into that here, but again, that's how we're going to move through and make decisions. And then we'll take some questions at the end. What we aren't going to talk about today is there's obviously ongoing litigation related to the failures. And then we may have folks on that kind of want to know, like, what does the end game look like here? And at the end of the day, we haven't made, or at least for the final projects, we haven't made any final decisions. The plans are still being worked on. So we obviously can't give you specific details about how it's going to affect your particular situation on permit decisions that haven't been made and plans that haven't been finalized. So we can't give you those outcomes. We can just talk about what that process is going to look like to get there. And then, we're not going to talk about sort of the reason behind the dam failures. If you're interested in that, you can go to damsafety.org and look at the ASDSO report. Four Lakes Task Force has got a bunch of information on their website too. So, but we're going to stay focused forward today. At the sort of highest level, we have been permitting, since the failures, emergency projects. There's actually an open public notice right now on different projects that are, happening within the basins and between them. And then obviously the sort of the final projects. Those are largely being permitted separately. So there's sort of separate permit application, separate permit decision, but it's a single process for all the major statutes. I mentioned dams or dam safety, the resource environmental statutes, and then the floodplain statute. That's a single process. So separate, we're permitting the project separately, but as we permit that project, we bring in all the major statutes and do it under one process. I'll just jump into these, but that process is going to follow sort of a basic timeline or a basic punch list as we move through it. There's an application period, a processing period, followed by which we make a decision. And then, I'll probably mention this again, but virtually all decisions that EGLE makes or Water Resources Division makes can be appealed. So during the application phase, we're going to get an application in for each individual project. The sort of final projects are going to be huge. The applications are going to be very, very big, hundreds or even potentially thousands of pages of plans and review and data collected and those types of things. So they'll be very, very big. We have a 30-day window to review that to see if it's administratively complete, not comparing it to the statute, but do we have all the decision information we need to make a decision? And then if it's complete, it moves on to the next phase or next period. Otherwise, we'll send a correction request. And if you look in the records, in almost all of our records, particularly for big projects like this, there is very likely to be a correction request sent. We'll need some additional information to say that it's administratively complete, meaning everything is there that we need to make a decision. If that correction request happens, there's a resubmission, we do the review, and we sort of go back through that process until it can be called complete. That application period is followed by a processing period. I won't get into the details on this. It really depends on how they play out in terms of how long that processing period is. It can take longer than 120 days if we're still working on things. But in general, that you see the ranges in days on these things. During that time, we may ask for clarification and amplification from the applicant, in this case, Four Lakes Task Force, maybe asking for more details that are necessary for us to either, sort of finally make that decision as we start to compare what we've got to what's in the statutes, to that decision-making criteria. During that processing period, for projects that have threatened and endangered species, that, large projects, we have sort of required sort of federal input. EPA will look at that. They have 90 days to object or comment on that application. And then there's the public input piece is built into that processing period. So for almost all these projects, I can't imagine there will be any, even the smaller ones, that won't have a public notice associated with them. So there'll be a public notice that goes out that will go out to local communities. It will go out to certain property owners, people that are impacted by the project. That public notice sort of kicks off the comment period. Our public comment period, that'll be 20 days or a minimum of 20 days. It may be longer than that, depending on when and if we hold a public hearing. I think it's really likely that, particularly for the sort of final projects, the big final projects, that will hold public meetings for those. A public meeting is a sort of like what we're doing here. It's just an exchange of information. We'll do a presentation, can take questions. If requested, we'll also hold a public hearing, which is really more formal. It's not interactive. It's an opportunity for the public to make verbal comments that become part of the record. So all of the comments that we get, the verbal ones and the written ones that come in, they're going to be reviewed and considered against the statutory decision-making criteria. We will typically do a responsiveness document to that, but may compile the questions. We're not going to respond to each individual question, but when we say, whatever, 50 of the people asked this, made this basic comment, and we will respond to that. So some tips for you, the public, as you're commenting on these things, focus on the statutory criteria. That's how we make decisions. And so if you can tie your comments that you have, whether you like the project or don't like it, to those statutory criteria, that's what helps us make decisions. And that's what we've got several of our staff that are in the programs here to talk about that a little bit as we move forward. So we'll get to that after I hand off the presentation here. So the other thing to know about that public input and public comments is it's not a vote. It is not, if 101 people say that they like the project and 100 people say they don't like the project, that doesn't mean a permit's going to get issued, and the same thing vice versa. What we're trying to do is seek the public's input in terms of how we compare that to how we make decisions. And again, we'll move on that in a little bit. So I mentioned a public hearing. You have an opportunity to sort of put verbal comments on the record. The other way that we collect those is through our MyWaters website. That's our permitting database. By the time we get to the end of this, and when we get towards the end of the when applications are maybe coming in a year or two from now, that MyWaters might be called My Enviro Portal or My Enviro. It's a name change. I don't know the details are important to anyone, but we're bringing more than just water programs into that database. So the name is going to change. But you really just need to Google it. There will be information in the public notice that explains how to get there. I have a screenshot of the front page of that there. On the top and the right is a public notice search. And this is basically just if you clicked on that public notice search, there's a bunch of different ways that you can find the public notice that you're looking for. In this case, I just typed in 4 Lakes today. Four Lakes Task Force has a permit application in front of us right now. So I know you can't read that very well. So I apologize for that. But on the far right side, once you find the application that you want to comment on, there's a button that says view or submit comment. If you click on that, you'll see a screen that looks something like this. There's tabs at the top, and you can go through basic details about the application. There's a documents tab where you can download the application. Again, that's going to be huge on some of these projects, but you can download the public notice, the application, get the information, and then if you click on the right tab, add a comment, there's an opportunity to add your comment in there. There is a character limit in the sort of box tab where you can enter the comment here, but there's also an opportunity to drag and drop or go add files to your comment. So that's all part of it. It becomes part of the public record. For those of you who may want to comment, you should know that it is part of the public record. So once you make that comment, you know that the information that you put in there is subject to public disclosure too. So I got to move along here. So so once we get past that processing phase, we're going to make a decision. We're going to compare the application to all of the decision-making criteria in the statute. Our staff go through literally line by line in those decision-making criteria and affirm or deny that the application meets that standard. And then we make a decision. We're going to issue or deny it. If we issue permits, dam safety permits are 2 years. They're issued for 2 years. They can be extended. The environmental and floodplain permits are issued for 5 years, period. No more, no less. So that's written right in the law. And I mentioned earlier, there's an appeal process for all of the decisions that we make. So something to keep in mind if and that can be whether the approval or the denial. If we approve a permit, you don't like it, you can appeal it. If we deny the permit and you don't like it, for the applicant doesn't like it, they can appeal that. They have a 60-day window to file that appeal process. And I won't get into the details of it, but you move into an administrative sort of almost like a pseudo court case, and then it can move to the courts after that. So like I said, everything that we do can be denied or can be appealed. So what we're doing right now, obviously we're permitting some of the interim projects that are out there. And we were spending a ton of time collaborating with 4 Lakes Task Force on the final projects. That's data collection on the environment, what wetlands are out there, lake streams, what is the resource as it sits today, and what is it, projected to look like after the dams are restored. We're working with them really closely on the technical designs for the dam safety piece and the floodplains, and meeting with them really regularly. And it's been a good partnership. And I think that relationship is working really well. It is really, really complex, the issues that we're working through. And so certainly that relationship has been really good. But again, one of the really things that I hope people walk away with is, we're gonna do our jobs. We're bound by the law, and that's how we make decisions. So I think that's it for me. I'm going to hand it off to Mike to jump in and start talking about the dam safety aspects and how we're going to make those decisions.
right, looks like Michael has his presentation up. Are you there, Mike?
You guys got me?
Oh, there you are.
Perfect. Okay. Thanks, Jared. So my name is Mike Size. I'm with EGLE's Water Resources Division and the Dam Safety Unit. I'm a regional engineer covering the northern Lower Peninsula and the Upper Peninsula. And I've been tasked with overseeing the dam safety side of the Four Lakes Task Force permit applications. So in my brief presentation, I'll go over some of the ongoing work, some of the plan applications, and then future work. And while we're reviewing those permit applications, the frameworks that we got to work within, so our statutory requirements and then our current design standards. Looking left to right here, you have the tobacco spillway. So this is on the left portion of the Edenville Dam, which is the west side. This was the first project undertaken for the stabilization under the emergency permit. The old barrel arches were removed and new concrete weirs were constructed in their place. Looking at the center photo, you have a drone photo of the Edenville Dam, the Tittabawassee side, so the east side. And similar to the tobacco spillway, the barrel arches were removed down to the concrete slabs. And the river was diverted back through the old spillway, and a steel sheet pile wall was constructed through the breach area. And the downstream area was then graded and has been seeded. On the right, you have a nice aerial photo of the Sanford Dam. So very similar to the tobacco. The new concrete weirs are currently being constructed within the barrel arches. And once those are constructed, the barrel arches will be demolished. And then again, a steel sheet pile wall will be placed along the embankment and the river diverted back through the spillway. So the Sanford, for the tobacco and Edenville, those stabilizations have already been completed, and the Sanford work is anticipated to be completed by the end of this year. So we're currently reviewing applications for the full restoration work at Secord and Smallwood dams, and we expect the permit applications for the Edenville and Sanford restorations by the end of this year. In addition to the full restoration plan, the department anticipates several permit applications to be submitted. Some of these are individual or major, and then some of them are minor. And these applications will be submitted as pieces of a larger project that can be performed prior to the issuance of the overall permit for each dam's restoration. These separate permit apps are reviewed as standalone projects. They must meet all the necessary statutory requirements, but they also function as a piece of the entire restoration project. So here we have a figure pulled from Four Lakes Task Force website, giving a timeline of each of the facets of these projects. I'll briefly touch on some of these. We have, like I said, the Edenville and Sanford stabilization projects. Edenville is already completed. Sanford will be completed by the end of this year. We currently have the Secord and Smallwood Dam restoration applications in. They're roughly at a 90% design, with anticipation to submit 100% design plans in the near future here. And given that timeline, they're anticipating starting construction towards the end of this year for both Secord and Smallwood, which will then extend into 2024. And then for the Edenville and Sanford restorations, they're currently at about a 30% design phase, with that engineering anticipated to go through next year. And then if that timeline upholds, then construction will begin in about 2024, with Sanford wrapping up in 2025, and then Edenville in 2026. So what are the statutory requirements for Part 315? Well, in order for the department to approve a permit application, all necessary calcs, investigations, and records need to be evaluated and then supplied by a licensed professional engineer. So currently, with our open restoration permit applications at Secord and Smallwood, all the environmental impacts must be accounted for, and the necessary documents submitted for the application be deemed administratively complete prior to issuance of a public notice. And then for the Edenville and Sanford Dam restoration projects, as well as for all projects, the department evaluates whether the work will have adverse effects on the public health, safety, welfare, property, or natural resources. And the dam safety's role is primarily on the application review for the safety side of things. And we work with our other personnel in the department to ensure that these other aspects are accounted for during the permit review. So all four of these dams are classified as high hazard. This one might be a little bit tough to chew through here. So for the state of Michigan, the minimum spillway capacity required for high hazard dams over 40 feet is the half probable maximum flood, or PMF. And using an industry standard set by FEMA, the appropriate spillway capacity requirements for Secord, Smallwood, and Edenville were determined to be somewhere between the half and the 3/4 PMF. So a risk-informed decision-making process was used to determine this. And this allows a dam owner or a regulator to consider risks associated with the performance of the dams relative to other dam safety risks. So in this method, a design flood is selected, and it ensures a given level of tolerable risk is not exceeded. And the strengths of this approach is that it includes or it provides dam owners and regulators an ability to assess the marginal value of increasing levels of flood protection while balancing capital investment and the risk reductions across the different failure modes. And it prioritizes the risk reduction actions across all the dams. And then lastly, the Sanford Dam, the design flood was determined through the incremental consequence analysis, which is a way of establishing a design flood by identifying a flood for which a scenario in which the downstream consequences with and without a failure are not significantly different. Due to the failures and recommendations of ASDSO, or the Association of State Dam Safety Officials, as well as Michigan's Dam Safety Task Force, Four Lakes Task Force is carrying out a complete reevaluation of the dams, which includes their hydrology, hydraulics, geotechnical, structural, mechanical, and their operation, maintenance, and monitoring plans. So based on the potential failure modes of each dam, a specific design, operation, and maintenance plan is created. And then this ensures that an adequate protections are made. Also, in the department's review, both the during construction and post-construction conditions are examined. So after we review all this information, there's three paths forward. We either permit the proposed activity as it's submitted. We allow the proposed activity if certain modifications are made. And lastly, we determine that the proposed activity is not permittable. And as Jared said earlier, these dam safety permits expire after 2 years, but can be extended. So with that, I'll give you a couple minutes to digest that and type in some questions while Brian gets his presentation going.
Thanks, Mike. Let's see if I can get this going here. Okay, I hope everybody can see that all right. Good evening. Thanks for joining us tonight to talk through some of these complex issues on these projects. As Jared and Mike have said, there are a lot of moving parts involved with what we are reviewing for Lakes Task Force. I'm going to talk briefly about parts 301, which is inland lakes and streams, as well as part 303, the wetlands protection portion of Public Act 451. There are a number of parts of statute involved. As you can see from this slide, everything is sort of intertwined. So when we start reviewing, especially on these projects, we're looking not only at dam safety, we're looking at wetlands, as Jared and Mike said, we're looking at inland lakes and streams, we're looking at all of these things get tied together in our review. So it can become a little unwieldy at times, especially if it's something that's new to you, like it is for you all. I'll start with part 301. I'm not going to read everything that's on these slides because some of them get a little wordy, but I will say this: everything that's on these slides can be found on our website. And if you just Google EGLE and go to the Water Resource Division pages, you'll find all this information, as well as a great deal more, including links to the actual portions of statute that are applicable. So you can kind of review what we're actually looking at when we're reviewing applications. So part 301, inland lakes and streams, focuses on just that, inland lakes and streams. Inland lakes are either natural or artificial, such as impoundments, dammed impoundments, like the lakes we're talking about tonight. Ponds or any body of water that has surface area of 5 acres or more. My apologies on that, jumped ahead of me. Streams, not necessarily applicable for the moment, but they are river streams. They include county drains, and they have a defined banks, a bed, visible evidence of flow, or continued occurrence of water. So what are regulated activities? Dredging and filling on the bottomland is a regulated activity. Constructing, enlarging, or extending structures such as docks, boat hoists are regulated activities. Constructing, expanding marinas, enlarging or diminishing a lake or stream, interfering with the flow of a lake or stream, constructing another artificial waterway that connects to a stream or a lake, or connecting any natural or artificial water with an existing inland lake or stream. Some examples of those projects include the most common that we see all around our lakes: shoreline protection, such as seawalls, riprap, some bioengineering, permanent docks, dredging projects, beach creation, outfalls, ponds, bridges, culverts, obviously in this case dams, and stream relocations and stream work. All require a permit under part 301. One concept that we have to keep in mind when we talk about part 301 is the idea of riparian rights, which are rights that are granted or accrued to property owners who live on the water body involved and have an ownership stake in the bottomland. That's a little different on impoundments that are owned, such as these lakes, because they belong to the counties, with a delegated authority being 4 Lakes Task Force. But as a statewide concept, these riparian rights do exist, and they are codified under part 301. So what's a bottomland? Bottomland is exactly what it sounds like. It's the area of the lake below the ordinary high water mark. An ordinary high water mark is the area where you have a transition. It's the most simple way to look at it is it's the transition between the upland area and the lake itself. It's that area where the soil, the vegetation, and the shoreline changes to become an aquatic system. On lakes that have a legal lake level, such as these lakes in question, the legal lake level becomes the regulatory ordinary high water mark. If you want some good information on this, I do recommend you go to our YouTube page. There's some very good educational videos there explaining the concept of what the ordinary high water mark is. Some examples, as you can see the watermarks on that seawall, but more to the point right here, this is a good example of a natural ordinary high water mark where you have a transition from the lake environment to the upland, or in this case, the yard. So what are we looking at? The department shall not issue a permit if the structure or projects will adversely affect public trust or riparian rights. So we look at what are all the possible effects on the aquatic environment, including recreation, fisheries habitat, wildlife, aesthetics, agricultural, commerce, industry. We cannot issue a permit. We're prohibited by statute from issuing a permit if the structure project will unlawfully impair or destroy any waters of the state or natural resources. Also, projects that are issued under Part 301 cannot result or cause pollution as defined under Part 31. So you can see there's a lot of intertwining with all the different parts of statute that we're responsible for. Next, I'm going to talk briefly about Part 303, which is the wetlands protection portion of statute, and it is written and designed to protect, protect wetland functions and values across the state. And so the question is, what constitutes a wetland? A wetland is an area that is characterized by the presence of water at a frequency and duration sufficient to support, and under normal circumstances does support, wetland vegetation or aquatic life. It is commonly referred to as a bog, swamp, or marsh. That's a lot. What causes it to be regulated are a number of things. If it's within 1,000 feet of the Great Lakes, if it's within 500 feet of an inland lake or stream, if it's directly connected, if it's 5 acres or more, if in some cases it's considered what has been identified as a rare and imperiled wetland, and the list of rare and imperiled wetlands are found in statute, or there has been a documented occurrence of a threatened endangered species. There's 3 criteria that are used to identify a wetland. One is the predominance of wetland vegetation, the occurrence of wetland soils, and wetland hydrology, which is simply just means it has enough water on it to allow wetland plants and wetland soils to develop. And it's not as long as most people think. It's really only about 2 weeks during the growing season. The state of Michigan, as well as all the federal agencies, follow the 1987 Corps of Engineers Wetland Delineation Manual, and specifically in Michigan, we follow the North Central Northeast supplement to that manual to identify and map wetlands. If you do go to our webpage for some additional information, you will see we offer a wetland identification program that allows people to have us come out and identify wetlands on their property, as well as if you have a private company do it for you, we can come out and confirm those boundaries. We also have a list of wetland consultants if you wish to if you ever need that service. One really handy aspect of the wetlands page that you can look at is what's called the wetland map viewer. It's shown here. And essentially it's just an aerial view. And if you take a look, you go in there, you can select the portions of the wetland mapping system you want to look at, and it'll identify wetlands in your area. You can zoom right in to your specific parcel of interest. Water regulated activities. Dredging or filling in a wetland requires a permit from us. Constructing, operating, or maintaining a use or development in a wetland requires a permit, as well as draining surface water from a wetland. So the permit review criteria, again, it's in some ways similar to Part 301. We shall not approve a permit unless the department determines the issuance is in the public interest and necessary to realize those benefits, and then it's otherwise lawful. In addition to that, it has to meet all the listed criteria that's found in statute. What we're really doing is it's a balancing act. It's the effect on the natural resources, loss of the use to the public and the benefit to the public versus a need for the project, including things like economic value. Again, we balance the private versus public need when we review these. One of the key concepts that we look at when we're reviewing a wetland project is, are there feasible and prudent alternatives? And feasible and prudent alternatives, I'm going to skip by here because this is pretty wordy. My apologies. Here we are. Feasible and prudent alternatives. We have to consider whether there is an alternative that avoids and minimizes the impacts on the natural resource. In question, in this case, the well. And these alternatives can be fairly broad. It can include using a different location than proposed. It can require a different configuration than proposed. It might involve reducing the size or changing the method that's involved. All of these criteria are what we really focus on when we're looking at a wetlands project. That was very quick, very brief, but again, if you take a look at our webpage, all of this information is available, and there's a lot there. So I strongly recommend you take a look. There's also links to the statutes as well. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Matt Acapinti to talk about our floodplain program.
All right, here we go. I do not have any slides, but my name is Matt Acapinti. Good evening. I'm a floodplain engineer with EGLE and the state's National Flood Insurance Program Coordinator. I'm just going to give a brief overview of the state floodplain statute and the requirements and the review process. So Part 31 is the state floodplain statute. Part 31 typically requires permits for any occupation, filling, or grading within the 100-year floodplain. I'm going to summarize, but Part 31 has essentially kind of three main requirements when we're reviewing projects that are going to take place in the 100-year floodplain. Buildings have their lowest floor, which includes the basement, a foot above the 100-year flood elevation. The storage capacity of the floodplain is maintained. So for projects that propose large amounts of fill within the floodplain, we are typically going to require what we call compensating cut. That's where the applicant is going to need to find some place to remove material from the floodplain so that there's somewhere for those floodwaters to go. And then the other requirement, which is more directly applicable to these projects, the portions of the floodplain that are the floodways. So the floodway is going to be the channel and the overbank areas where there are typically moving floodwaters during that large 100-year flood. So the portions that are floodways are kept free of obstruction to allow floodwaters to pass downstream. Anytime there are encroachments that are proposed, so things like fill, buildings, structures like dams or seawalls or levees that are in that floodway area, they have the possibility to pinch down that floodway, which could have the result of increased flooding upstream because the water cannot pass through that area as effectively. And that the whole point of Part 31 is to prevent that from happening. So typically when we're reviewing projects that occur in the floodway, we're going to be reviewing modeling to show what the impacts are going to be on the floodway and on the floodplain elevations as a result of that project. For these projects, one point of clarification that I do want to make is that when we're making this comparison, we're going to be doing this to the pre-dam failure conditions. So we're not going to be evaluating, the proposed dam with increases as it compared to existing conditions today with the eroded dams. That just doesn't make much sense. But what we are going to be doing during the review process is evaluating that proposed project and how that would compare to the previously existing conditions with the dams in place. And so that is kind of the basis of the floodplain review under the state floodplain statute. It is also possible, so for areas that participate in the National Flood Insurance Program, if there is a mapped floodplain by FEMA, there is a requirement to keep those flood maps up to date. So there would be, if the project is going to change those FEMA flood maps, the applicant is going to have to work through that revision process with us and with FEMA. it's too early at this point to tell if that's going to be an issue, but that's something that we would be looking at during the review process. And that is really all I am prepared to speak about as far as the floodplain aspects of this project.
All right, thanks, Matt, and all the presenters. I think it's my turn. We're going to go into a little bit of question and answer here. So it'd be appreciated if our presenters could put their cameras on for this. And I'm just going to put a quick questions slide up here. All right, welcome. Yeah, and thanks to everyone for typing your questions. I know several of you have been typing questions in as we go, and we've been trying to basically get back with you on some of these in responding to your question directly in writing. But if you, let's see, I'm trying to look here. And some of these are statements that I have. So what we're looking for are questions on the presentation today and on the relevant information in the presentations today. So if you have that, please have a question, please type it in. And if some of these two are, see here, I've got one here that I'm not sure what it's referencing because it was in the middle of one of the presentations, but what was the basis of this? i.e., is it based on the current situation of the lakes and waterways, i.e., with the current empty lake bed? So if you type that in, it'd be great if you could provide some more info because I'm not sure what it's referencing. And if any of our panelists know, please feel free.
So Ryan, I think that ties into the question right before that. So Mr. Pasick also asked, the statute talks about significant adverse effect on a multitude of things. So, and then I think his question is so when we compare, when we're making our decision about, what impacts is the project happening? Are we comparing it to the pre-failure or post-failure condition? Unfortunately, the answer to that isn't completely simple. So, but in general, so the upper two dams, Secord and Smallwood, within the Dam Safety Act, there is a specific time frame from when we can look at something as like a restoration and when we have to consider it to be like a whole new application. And so I think in general on the upper two, with the dam safety, those are considered repairs of an existing dam, and on the lower two, on Edenville and Sanford, those are considered new dams for the purposes of the application. On the full restoration, so the lower two, it's going to be a sort of a combination of those things. There's no real roadmap for this, so this is thankfully something that we don't deal with very often. So we are certainly going to look at, so part of the things that we're working with Four Lakes Task Force on is what wetlands are forming in the floodplain as it exists today post failure, but also looking at what was there before the failure, and then what would ostensibly be there after restoration. So all of those things are going into a mixer as we're trying to work our way through those things. And that's just one kind of little piece. So it's really, really complicated. But we're considering all of those things. What was there pre-failure? What would be there after restoration, and also sort of what is forming and what exists today. So it's not a real direct answer, but the real answer is it's complicated, and we're trying to do the best we can to do make the right decision there.
All right, yeah, thanks for that, Jared. Let's see here. So we've got, it looks like you might have been starting to respond to this one, Jared. The question talks about the the plan perhaps being accepted, I'm assuming in the context of permitting, anything that you want to, I guess, elaborate on?
Yeah, I can. And again, I don't want to jump on all these, the staff definitely jump in. I mean, so at the end of the day, so I kind of mentioned this at the start, and it's not surprising. I mean, people have been hugely impacted by this, and they've been, waiting 2 years to find an answer. I mean, at the end of the day, I can't give you an answer to a permit decision that hasn't been made yet on designs that aren't complete yet, right? But what I can tell you is, the way that these laws work, if you can meet the standard in the law, you get a permit for the project that you apply for. If you don't meet those decision-making criteria, you don't. So that's what we're spending all this time working with Four Lakes Task Force and some of the local communities on, is making sure that we can answer those questions. And when the permit, applications come in, they're complete, and we're able to make those assessments. I know that's unsatisfying, and I'm sorry about that, but I can't put a percentage on it. What I can tell you is, if you meet the statutory criteria, we're obligated in the law to issue permits.
All right, thanks for that, Jared. And then another question, does this mean there's a possibility that dams and lakes may not be restored because of changes in wetlands and floodplains?
Not necessarily. Can you read it again? I don't have that.
Yeah, I'm not entirely sure what it's referencing, but does this mean there's a possibility that dams and lakes may not be restored because of the changes in wetlands and floodplains?
No, I don't necessarily think that's the case. At the end of the day, that's why we ran through those decision-making criteria. So I don't think that it has to do that you can't build a dam because wetlands have formed in the bottom.
Okay, yeah, thanks for the question. Thanks for that, Jared. Another one, I'm not sure how much you can speak to it, but the question is new dams in the lower two, question mark?
Yeah, so I think that's a reaction to how I answered the questions. What I was talking about is, there's specific language in the dam safety statute that says, post failure with it. If you and Luke or Mike jump in on this, because I don't know the exact language, but essentially there's a time frame in there, and if you are going to rebuild within X amount of time, it can be considered a repair or restoration. If it exceeds that amount of time, you have to consider it a new dam. Essentially, that's just the language in the dam safety statute.
Sure, and I can elaborate just a little bit.
Yeah.
The upper two dams, Secord and Smallwood, did not fail. So any proposed work at those dams are what's called an alteration of an existing dam, which is a different set of requirements for documentation, et cetera, for a permit application. Typically, construction of a dam requires, in addition to under Part 315, that is, in addition to providing all the information to ensure that the dam is safe, an assessment of environmental impacts. And Mike had a laundry list of items with wetlands, fisheries, water quality, et cetera, that must be considered when we permit construction of a dam. The statute, or actually the rules and the Part 315 rules, differentiate reconstruction of a failed dam within 1 year from reconstruction of a failed dam outside of 1 year. So this falls in reconstruction of Edenville and Sanford would fall into the second category of reconstruction after or greater than 1 year following failure. So the permit application must include more information on all that laundry list of items that Mike talked about earlier, which was an assessment of the positive and negative impacts to all of those things. So it's treated like a new dam in that the permit application process is similar to a new dam, but it means that additional information must be submitted with the permit application. And then, as Jared had indicated, that that all that information is evaluated against the criteria in the separate statutes and a permit decision is made. So it's treated like a new dam, but it's, you know, it's kind of more of a formality, right, of the statutory requirements.
Okay, yeah, thanks for the answer. Yeah, we got quite a few more that came in, so we'll keep rolling with these. Does the permit application contain monitoring, operation, and maintenance requirements and timelines? Anyone particular, I don't know, can speak to that? I'm assuming this is, I'm not sure which.
I'm not finding it again. Can you, I was reading while you were talking.
Oh, yeah, yeah, no
So
problem.
go ahead. Can you read it again?
Does the permit application contain monitoring, operation, and maintenance requirements and timelines? I'm assuming this isn't 301, 03 question, probably more.
Yeah. So I'll split that up a little bit. So we need like construction sequencing and things like that, you know, how things are going to be built and timelines for those things, like how long impacts are going to be. But I also think there's a question in there that's better for Mike or Luke, which is probably like, you know, how do we oversee maintenance and things like that at the dams, at you know, existing dams, like presuming a permit's issued and it's built, you know, how do we monitor that?
Yeah, if you want to elaborate on that, Mike or Luke, that'd be great.
Sure. As part of the dam safety review, since the current proposals would change operation and maintenance of the dams, that, you know, the dams would look a lot different than they do today under the current designs. We have requested updated operations and maintenance plans for each of the dams, which would outline, you know, normal day-to-day kind of routine mowing and you know, gate operation checks and maintenance, et cetera, but then also the long-term and flood out and emergency or flood operations as well. So we have requested that as part of the permit application to understand how the dams would be operated kind of day to day, but also during an emergency, you know, if there were another large flood event, how would the dams be operated? So yes, I guess is the short answer. We are requiring that gets submitted as part of the application review.
Okay, excellent. I've got a question here that I think is a good follow-up. Can this process be accelerated on the rebuild? I'm assuming the permitting process. That's what is reference.
Yeah, so I'm not sure I fully understand the question. So I mean, there's so many moving pieces here. I mean, what I can tell you is that this has been and will continue to be a priority for our department. I mean, you know, certainly the people impacted by this are the you know, the ones that well, whatever are the most hurt by this. But I mean, we have dedicated hundreds or probably thousands of hours of staff time to working through this issue. And generally, we're a little more reactive. I mean, generally, the department reacts to applications, and so we've invested a substantial amount of time because this is a priority for us. So, you know, so I don't know, but there's so many other pieces that need to fall into place that are outside of what EGLE or I can answer for you in terms of funding and construction schedules and all those kind of things. Getting through the permitting processes as quickly as possible it is a priority for us. You know, the caveat I would give is it is very, very complex to work through these issues. So, you know, it obviously is going to take some time, but we're going to dedicate what we need to, and we're going to, you know, work as quickly as we can for our piece of it. And I know everyone else's too.
All right, thanks, Jared. Yeah, this is, I mean, just there was a follow-up comment to that question, and just referencing that what they were referring to is getting the water back faster. So I think project completion is what they're looking at accelerating.
Yeah. Yep.
I got a couple questions here. One, why is it important for residents to participate in the application process?
Yeah, I mean, number one, I think I mentioned earlier, that has been an absolute priority under this administration. I think at the end of the day, I mean, one of the most important things is that, I work in Lansing and live in Grand Rapids. We've got some local staff on there, but I mean, you guys are the ones that are affected by this process, and we don't know everything about every permit, area that we issue a permit in. And so in some ways, the public is the eyes and ears on the ground for us. And so that's how we not only learn more about the project, but we also learn more about what your concerns are. And I think we do a really good job with the things that we do, but we're not perfect. And so that's an extra set of eyes and ears out there to, help us get to the right decision, right project.
Excellent. Thanks, Jared. And I've got one here. I think you might have partially answered, but please, feel free to add more. Is EGLE and its reviews representing and assuring downstream residents their property interests are represented?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's built into the decision-making criteria in the statute. So I mean, certainly there's the dam safety piece of it. I don't need to tell anyone what happened when the failures happened and how catastrophic that is. And so that couldn't be more serious to us, but also, particularly like the Inland Lakes and Streams Act and all those things, that's all part of it. On that statute in particular, we don't just consider upstream. We consider, how rebuilding the dams, what type of impact that's going to have on the environment and downstream property. So, I mean, the short answer is that sort of holistic big picture look is built into the statutory decision making.
All right. Yeah, thanks for that. Another question here. How might the extensive weed and tree growth on the bottomlands be affected, or how would it affect the reflooding of the impoundment system? It's kind of how would extensive weed and tree growth on the bottomlands affect reflooding of the impoundment system?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that it affects our decision. It certainly could impact, what the final impoundment looks like, particularly all the cottonwood that's grown up there, which is astounding, by the way. So I know, again, we're not necessarily the ones that initiate projects. We review and work through it. I know Four Lakes Task Force is working on that. I just had a conversation a couple of weeks ago with one of the people at Four Lakes. So I know that they're working on some alternatives to try to assure that the impoundments are functional. But I don't know that at the end of the day, I mean, the fact that there's vegetation establishing is a good thing in many respects. It's controlling erosion. It's, stabilizing the banks, stabilizing the floodplain there. And so, there's certainly very good things about vegetation establishing. And I also know that that's an issue that Four Lakes Task Force has kind of been on from the beginning, and they're working on some issues there in terms of what does the impoundment look like when it's when it's reflooded, and what's the residual of that. So.
All right, thanks, Jared. I have a question here. This one might be good for Mike or Luke, but we'll see. But feel free to chime in, anybody. By working with the FLTF, the Four Lakes Task Force, you are only looking at the dams and the impact upstream. but FLTV does not concern itself with the impact on downstream citizens. How is your permitting process considering the potential adverse impact downstream of Sanford? And this is absent a catastrophic dam failure.
Yeah, I think I already talked about that, Ryan. I mean, that's built into the permitting process, that it doesn't just draw a line and look upstream, in particular with regards to the, how it affects the river system, but also the
Okay.
dam safety piece. So I think I kind of answered that one.
Gotcha. So this
Maybe not well, but I did my
No,
best.
I think this was one that was asked maybe a little before your answer, but I wanted to make sure that we're covering all of these. I have one here that is very open-ended. It was asked a little bit previously, but feel free to chime in. What does this all mean for the residents near Sanford and Edenville dams? Again, it doesn't go into any more detail. Feel free to.
Yeah,
if there's anything you want to add to that.
yeah. I don't know. I think the intent here today was, obviously there is a huge effort out there by Four Lakes Task Force, by the local communities, to figure out what to do. What is the final, what does this final project look like? And so, we're not necessarily the drivers of that. EGLE's not the one that decides what's in the application that comes back in. That's what's being pursued right now. And our job is to work with the local community, make sure in this case, Four Lakes Task Force, that make sure that they understand the things that we're gonna look at in terms of when we consider a permit. And I know there's a diversity of different opinions from the people that live around there about what should happen and why, and all those kind of things. We just have a little piece in that, in terms of how does that final project apply to environmental statutes. And so I don't know that I can give a really a complete answer on it. What we're trying to do here today is to make sure that everyone knows these processes are coming, they're ongoing, they're coming. Hopefully you understand it a little bit better when you leave here today, and you understand how you can be a part of it.
All right, thanks, Jared. I have one that Luke might be responding to, but how long is the application / permitting process? I know this was touched on and talked about. Maybe you can summarize or give a estimated timelines again.
Yeah, it really varies. So provided, assuming not an emergency, we issued some emergency permits pretty quickly when the system itself was really unstable. But it'll be, the short answer is it's months, not weeks, hopefully not years, right? Or not a year, right? So it really is going to depend on I guess the final project. So what I keep saying is the final project. So the final outcome ones, you could be looking 3 months is way undershooting, but 6 months, something like that. To give a direct answer, something in that neighborhood, maybe shorter. It depends on, how much there is to work out. And I think there's a bunch of people on here to understand, how complicated really what's going on there is. So, and frankly, we need to do our due diligence. This is a huge decision. And all of the concerns that have come up, I've seen sort of both pro and con in terms of what people think and feel. We got to do our job and make sure that whatever goes back in there is safe, it's environmentally sound, and it's protective of people's property.
All right, thanks, Jared. It looks like at this point, those are all the questions that I have in the hopper, and it's about time to wrap up. So I think we can move on here. But what I would like to see, Jared, do you have any, I guess we've gone through a number of presentations tonight, gone through a lot of questions and answered. Do you have any, I guess, final comments for us, Jared?
No, nothing terribly fancy, Ryan. I really appreciate people taking the time to be with us, and I know we probably covered, we tried to, not get too far into the weeds. I know we covered a ton of information, and so I think you should feel hopefully you learned something. I know it's going to be recorded, and so when there's an opportunity, when there's one of these permitting processes out there, you can revisit it. And of course, we're always here for questions too. And it has been a long haul, and so I appreciate the grace of the people who joined us, and we're working hard trying to work with your communities to do the right thing. And I just got done saying it, but make sure that what's out there is the right project, and those partnerships are going good.
Excellent. Yeah, thanks for those comments, Jared. And thanks to all of our presenters and people on our question and answer panel for answering all the questions, and for all of you folks for asking such great questions and for being with us tonight. As Jared had mentioned, this webinar, or this public information session, was recorded. It'll be on our YouTube channel in a few days, but we'll also be sending you a link so you'll be able to access that recording and can reference it again. But with that, I'd like to thank you all for joining us tonight, and hope you have a great rest of your evening. Thanks again. I'm having trouble closing out this webinar. Jim, are you able to close it out for me?